The blizzard hit Montana territory with such fury that Franklin Xavier thought he might die before reaching the next homestead. But then he saw her crumpled form in the snow like a dark stain against the white death surrounding them both. He urged his horse forward through the knee-deep drifts, his face wrapped in layers of wool that did little to stop the wind from cutting into his skin like broken glass. The woman lay motionless except for the faint trembling that told him she still lived, though barely. Her dark dress was soaked through, her lips blue and ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. Franklin dismounted in one swift motion and knelt beside her, his gloved hands checking for signs of life. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was rough from the cold and disuse. He had been riding alone for 3 days. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. He could not leave her here to die. Whatever had brought her out into this storm, whatever tragedy had led to this moment, none of it mattered now. Franklin scooped her into his arms, alarmed at how light she felt, how her body shook with violent tremors. He managed to get her onto his horse, holding her against his chest as he climbed up behind her. The animal protested the double weight, but Franklin urged him forward with gentle pressure from his knees. "Just a mile more, boy," he murmured to the horse. "There's an old trapper's cabin just over that ridge." The wind howled in response, throwing more snow into their faces. Franklin tucked the woman closer against him, trying to share what little warmth his body still held. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he felt the faint puff of her breath against his neck. Still alive, he had to keep her that way. The cabin appeared through the white curtain like a blessing from God himself. Franklin had used it twice before on his trips between Black Hawk and the northern ranches. It was rough but solid, with a stone fireplace and shutters that still held. He half carried, half dragged the woman inside, kicking the door shut behind them to block out the murderous wind. The interior was dark and cold but blessedly still. Franklin laid the woman on the floor near the fireplace and immediately set about building a fire. His fingers were clumsy with cold, but he had done this 1,000 times. Within minutes, flames began to lick at the kindling, and within 10 minutes, a proper fire blazed in the hearth. Only then did he turn his full attention to the woman. Her clothes were frozen stiff in places, and he knew he had to get them off her or she would die. He worked quickly and clinically, stripping away the soaked dress, the layers of undergarments, averting his eyes as much as possible. He wrapped her in his own dry blankets and his spare shirt, then in his bedroll. Her skin was like ice. Franklin built up the fire higher and rubbed her hands between his, trying to restore circulation. Her fingers were white, the nails purple. Frostbite was a real possibility. He chafed her hands, then her feet, working to bring feeling back to her extremities. All the while she remained unconscious, her breathing shallow and uneven. "Come on," he muttered. "You did not survive out there just to die in here." He heated water in his tin cup and tried to get some between her lips. Most of it dribbled out, but some went down. He tried again and again, patient and persistent. As the cabin warmed and he continued his ministrations, color began to return to her face in slow degrees. The violent shivering eased somewhat, though tremors still ran through her. It was near midnight by his reckoning when her eyes finally opened. They were brown, he noticed, a deep brown like creek water over stones. Confused at first, then frightened, darting around the cabin before landing on his face. "Easy," Franklin said, holding up his hands. "You are safe. I found you in the snow. This is a trapper's cabin about 7 miles north of Black Hawk." She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too hard. He gave her more warm water, holding the cup to her lips with one hand while supporting her head with the other. "Drink slow," he said. She obeyed, and after a few sips, she managed to speak. My husband is dead." The words came out flat, stated as simple fact. Franklin nodded slowly. "I am sorry. He died 3 days ago. Fever took him fast." Her voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I was trying to reach town, to tell someone, to get help for the burial. The storm came up so quick." "You should not have gone out in this weather," Franklin said, though his tone was gentle, not accusing. "I had no choice." Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over onto her cheeks. "I could not just leave him there. I could not." Franklin understood grief, understood the irrational things it made people do. He had seen men walk into gunfire over it, seen women throw themselves into rivers. Going out in a blizzard to get help for a dead husband seemed almost reasonable by comparison. "What is your name?" he asked. "Theresa." "Theresa Zimmerman." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Xavier, Franklin Xavier. Most folks call me Frank. Thank you, Frank." The words seemed to cost her effort, as though gratitude was a weight she could barely lift. The storm raged for 2 more days. Franklin kept the fire going constantly, venturing out only to tend to his horse in the lean to shelter behind the cabin, and to gather more wood from the stack the trappers maintained there. Theresa recovered slowly, her strength returning in increments. She developed a fever the second day, and Franklin feared pneumonia, but he forced her to drink water and the tea he made from herbs in his saddlebags. And by the third morning, the fever broke. They talked during those long hours trapped together. He learned she was 24, that she had been married for 3 years to a homesteader named Robert Zimmerman. They had claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act, built a soddy, planted wheat. It had been hard, but they were making it work. Then the fever came. "He was fine one morning," she said, staring into the fire. "By evening he could not get out of bed. By the next night he was gone." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I sat with his body for a day before I decided to go for help. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I was crazy. I do not know any more." Franklin told her about himself too, though he was not usually a talkative man. He was 28, born in Missouri, came west after the war. He worked as a ranch hand, a drover, whatever paid. He had no land, no ties, no family left alive. He drifted from job to job, town to town, never staying anywhere long. "Sounds lonely," Theresa said. "It is," Franklin admitted, "but it is the only life I know now." On the third night, as the storm finally began to ease, Theresa woke from a nightmare, crying out. Franklin was at her side in an instant, touching her shoulder carefully. "You are safe," he said. "Just a dream." But she was shaking again, not from cold this time, but from grief and fear and exhaustion. Without thinking, Franklin sat beside her and she turned into him, pressing her face against his shoulder. "Hold me closer," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I cannot be alone right now. I cannot." He wrapped his arms around her and held her while she cried, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. He said nothing, just held her, letting her grief pour out. Eventually, the sobs eased into quiet tears, then into silence. She did not pull away and he did not let go. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling beside them, the wind dying outside. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "You do not need to thank me. I do." She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something else in them now, something beyond grief. "You saved my life. You have been kind when you did not have to be. You have not taken advantage. You have been a gentleman." "That is just being a decent human being," Franklin said. "In my experience, decent human beings are rare." She attempted a smile, but it wavered, especially in Montana Territory in 1884. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The snow had stopped and the sky was a hard, bright blue. Franklin knew they needed to get moving. Theresa's homestead was out there somewhere along with her dead husband. She needed to get back, needed to do right by him. "Can you ride?" he asked as they prepared to leave. "I think so." He helped her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her. She was still weak, still recovering, and he did not trust her to ride alone. She leaned back against him naturally, as though they had done this 100 times before. Theresa directed him as best she could, though the snow had transformed the landscape into something alien and unfamiliar. It took them most of the day to find her homestead, a small soddy built into the side of a low hill, smoke still visible from the chimney that had burned low but not out. Robert Zimmerman lay in the bed where he had died, covered with a quilt. The cabin was neat and spare, the furnishings rough but well made. Franklin helped Theresa inside and she stood looking at her husband's body for a long moment. "I should bury him," she said, "but the ground is frozen solid." "We will figure something out," Franklin said. He had no intention of leaving her to deal with this alone. They wrapped Robert's body in canvas and Franklin managed to dig a shallow grave near a stand of cottonwoods, breaking through the frozen earth with an axe and shovel. It took hours of brutal work. Theresa read from the Bible while Franklin lowered the body into the ground. There were no tears this time. She had cried herself dry. "He was a good man," she said when it was done. "He did not deserve to die at 26. "No one deserves that," Franklin agreed. They returned to the soddy and Franklin built up the fire while Theresa made coffee and heated beans. They ate in silence, the weight of death heavy in the small space. "What will you do now?" Franklin asked finally. Theresa looked around the cabin. "I do not know. I cannot work this claim alone. I am not strong enough. I do not know farming well enough. Robert did most of that." She set down her cup. "I suppose I will have to go back east, to my sister in Ohio. I have no one else." The thought of her leaving created an unexpected hollow feeling in Franklin's chest. He had known this woman for only 3 days, but something had formed between them in that cabin, something forged in survival and vulnerability and the intimacy of shared hardship. "You do not have to decide right now," he said. "I know." She looked at him, really looked at him. "Will you stay?" "Just for tonight. I know it is asking a lot. You have already done so much, but I do not think I can be here alone. Not yet." "I will stay as long as you need," Franklin said and meant it. That night, Franklin slept on the floor near the fire while Theresa took the bed. But in the dark hours before dawn, he woke to find her standing over him. "I cannot sleep," she said. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him dying again." Franklin sat up. "That is natural. It has only been a few days. Will you talk to me? Tell me something, anything." "I just need to hear another voice." So he did. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about his parents and his 2 brothers, all dead now from war or disease. He told her about the first time he rode a horse alone, about learning to rope cattle, about sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He talked until his voice grew hoarse and the sky began to lighten in the east. Theresa listened to every word, sitting beside him wrapped in a blanket. When he finally stopped talking, she reached out and took his hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Franklin stayed for a week. He told himself it was to make sure she was all right, that she had enough wood and food, that she was strong enough to be alone. But the truth was, he did not want to leave. Theresa was unlike any woman he had known. She was strong despite her grief, practical despite her loss. She did not weep constantly or fall apart. She got up each day and did what needed doing. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, cooked meals, mended clothes. She lived. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day, talking by the fire at night. Franklin repaired things around the homestead that had needed attention, fixed a broken shutter, reinforced the chicken coop, chopped enough wood to last a month. Theresa cooked and washed and slowly began to smile again, small tentative smiles that lit something warm in Franklin's chest. On the seventh night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Theresa said, "You should probably go soon." The words hit Franklin like a physical blow. "Do you want me to?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No, but people will talk if you stay. A widow and a single man living together. It is not proper." "I do not give a damn about proper," Franklin said, then caught himself. "Pardon my language." "I do not give a damn about it either," Theresa said, and there was a spark in her eyes, something fierce and alive. "But I have to live here, or decide not to live here. Either way, I have to think about my reputation." "Then marry me," Franklin said. The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. They stared at each other across the fire. "What?" Theresa said finally. "Marry me." Now that he had said it, the idea felt right, felt inevitable. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. I know you are grieving. But I also know that I do not want to leave. I know that you make me want to stay in one place for the first time in 5 years. I know that when I think about riding away from here, something in me feels like it is breaking." Theresa's eyes were wide, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Frank, you do not have to answer now," he said quickly. "Just think about it. I have some money saved. We could make this homestead work together, or we could go somewhere else, start fresh. I do not care which. I just know I want to be with you." She stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the dark prairie. Franklin waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had never been so exposed, so vulnerable. He had never wanted anything so much. "I loved Robert," Theresa said finally, her back still to him. "I loved him truly. He was kind and good, and he did not deserve to die. I know. But I also know that sometimes the world does not wait for us to be ready." She turned to face him. "I also know that you are a good man, Franklin Xavier, maybe the best man I have ever met. And I know that life is short and uncertain, and we have to take what happiness we can find." "Is that a yes?" Franklin hardly dared to breathe. "It is a yes," Theresa said. "But not right away. Give me a month. Let me mourn properly. Let me be sure. And if in a month you still want this, still want me, then yes, I will marry you." Franklin crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "I will still want you in a month. I will still want you in a year. I will still want you when we are old and gray." She smiled, a real smile this time, full and bright. "That is a long time for a drifter to settle down." "Then I guess I am done drifting," Franklin said. He rode into Black Hawk the next day to send a telegram to the ranch where he had been heading, explaining he would not be coming. Then he bought supplies, fabric for a dress for Theresa, seeds for spring planting, everything they would need. The shopkeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, gave him a knowing look. "Heard about Robert Zimmerman," she said. "Shame about that fever. He was a good man." "He was," Franklin agreed. "And I heard you found his widow in the snow, saved her life." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were sharp and appraising. "That was a good thing you did. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone." She wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "But you mind yourself, young man. That woman is grieving. She needs time, not a new husband." "I understand that," Franklin said stiffly. "Do you? Because from where I am standing, it looks like you are buying an awful lot of supplies for someone who is just passing through." She tied the package with string. "I am not saying you are a bad man. I am saying grief does strange things to people, makes them make decisions they might not make otherwise. You understand?" Franklin met her eyes steadily. "I understand, and I appreciate your concern. But Theresa is a grown woman. She can make her own choices." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. "That she can. You just make sure you are giving her space to make them clearly." The words stuck with Franklin as he rode back to the homestead. Was he pushing too hard? Was he taking advantage of Theresa's vulnerability? He had told himself no, that what he felt was real and true, but what if Mrs. Patterson was right? What if Theresa only thought she wanted this because she was scared and alone? When he reached the soddy, Theresa was outside scattering feed for the chickens. She looked up as he rode in, shading her eyes against the sun, and smiled. The sight of her made his doubts evaporate like morning mist. "You were gone a long time," she called. "I was starting to worry. Just getting supplies." He dismounted and began unloading the packages, and thinking. About what? He told her about his conversation with Mrs. Patterson, about his doubts. Theresa listened quietly, then took his hand. "Frank, I appreciate that you are worried about me, but I promise you I am thinking clearly. I know it seems fast. I know people will judge us. But I also know that what I felt sitting in that cabin during the storm, what I feel when I look at you, is real. It is different from what I felt with Robert, but it is no less true." "How is it different?" Franklin asked. She considered the question carefully. "With Robert, it was comfortable. Safe. We grew up in the same town, went to the same church. Marrying him felt like the natural next step. I loved him and he loved me, but there was no fire to it, no urgency. With you—" She paused, searching for words. "With you, I feel alive in a way I have never felt before. Like I am standing on the edge of something vast and unknown and terrifying and wonderful all at once." Franklin pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I feel that too." They stood like that for a long moment, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, holding on against the uncertainty of the future. The month passed slowly and quickly at the same time. Franklin continued sleeping on the floor by the fire while Theresa took the bed. They worked together during the day, preparing for spring planting, repairing equipment, caring for the animals. In the evenings, they talked and read aloud to each other from Theresa's small collection of books. Franklin taught her to play poker with beans for chips. She taught him to make decent bread. There were hard days when Theresa's grief would overtake her, and she would withdraw into herself, barely speaking. Franklin learned to give her space on those days, to be present without being intrusive. There were other days when she was almost giddy with happiness, laughing at small things, spontaneous and light. Those days worried Franklin more because he knew they would be followed by guilt, by the feeling that she was betraying Robert's memory by being happy. "You are allowed to be happy," he told her one evening after she had apologized for laughing at one of his stories. "Robert would not want you to spend the rest of your life in mourning." "How do you know what Robert would want?" The words came out sharper than she intended, and she immediately looked apologetic. "I am sorry. That was not fair. No, you are right. I did not know him. But I know that if I loved someone, truly loved them, I would want them to go on living after I was gone. I would want them to find happiness again, even if it was with someone else." Theresa's eyes filled with tears. "I think he would have liked you. You are both good men. Then do not feel guilty for being happy. Honor his memory by living the best life you can." As the month drew to a close, Franklin rode into Black Hawk to make arrangements with the pastor at the small Methodist church. Reverend Calloway was a thin man with kind eyes who listened to Franklin's story without judgment. "You understand that people will talk," he said. "A month is considered quite soon to remarry after a death. I understand. But we are not doing this to spite anyone or because we are not taking Robert's death seriously. We are doing this because life is short and we do not want to waste the time we have." Reverend Calloway nodded. "Then I will marry you. This Saturday, if that suits. I assume you want a small ceremony. Just witnesses enough to make it legal. This is for us, not for show." When Franklin returned to the homestead, Theresa was pacing nervously in front of the soddy. She rushed to him as he dismounted. "I was afraid you had changed your mind," she said. "That you had decided this was madness and ridden off." "Never." He caught her hands. "This Saturday, the Reverend Calloway will marry us. That is, if you still want to." "I still want to." But her eyes were anxious. "Frank, are you absolutely sure? Because once we do this, there is no going back. You will be tied to this place, to this life, to me. No more drifting. No more freedom." "I have never been more sure of anything," Franklin said. "You are not a cage, Theresa. You are home." She kissed him then, the first real kiss they had shared. It was tentative at first, testing, then deeper as months of suppressed feeling poured out. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Saturday," Theresa whispered. "Saturday," Franklin agreed. They were married on a cold March morning in 1884 with Mrs. Patterson and her husband serving as witnesses. Theresa wore the dress Franklin had bought fabric for, which she had sewn herself in the evenings while he was outside doing chores. It was simple but beautiful, dark blue calico with white buttons. Franklin wore his best shirt and had even trimmed his beard. The ceremony was short and simple. They spoke their vows clearly and meant every word. When Reverend Calloway pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed Theresa gently, aware of the witnesses watching, aware that this moment was both an ending and a beginning. Mrs. Patterson hugged Theresa afterward. "You be happy, girl," she said quietly. "Lord knows you have earned it." They spent their wedding night in the same soddy where Theresa had nursed her first husband through his final hours, but it felt different now. It was theirs together, sanctified by vows and choice. Franklin was gentle and patient, aware that this was complicated for Theresa in ways he could only imagine. But she came to him willingly, openly, and when they finally came together, it felt right and true. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Theresa's head on his chest, Franklin felt a peace he had never known. This was what he had been searching for all those years of drifting. Not a place, but a person. Not freedom, but belonging. "I love you," Theresa whispered. "I know I have not said it yet. I was not sure I was allowed to, with everything so complicated, but I do. I love you, Franklin Xavier." "I love you too," Franklin said, and felt the truth of it settle into his bones. "I will love you until the day I die. And after that. And after that, if there is an after, I will find you there too." Spring came late to Montana Territory that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath. Green shoots began to appear in the fields. Franklin and Theresa planted wheat and corn and vegetables, working side by side from dawn to dusk. It was brutal work, harder than anything Franklin had done as a cowboy, but it was satisfying in a way that drifting had never been. He was building something permanent, something that would last. Theresa bloomed along with the land. The sad, broken woman he had found in the snow was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more vibrant. She laughed often now, sang while she worked, talked about the future with genuine excitement. Franklin watched her and marveled at the resilience of the human spirit, at its capacity to heal and grow and love again. In May, Theresa realized she was pregnant. She told Franklin one evening as they sat watching the sunset from the bench he had built outside the soddy. "I think I am with child," she said simply. Franklin's first reaction was pure joy, followed immediately by concern. "Are you happy about it?" "I am." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I am terrified too, but yes, I am happy. Are you?" "I am everything," Franklin said honestly. "Happy and scared and excited and worried all at once." "That sounds about right," Theresa said with a smile. The pregnancy progressed without major complications. though Theresa was sick in the mornings for the first few months. Franklin took over more of the heavy work, insisting she rest when she grew tired. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated as fragile, but eventually accepted his help with grace. As her belly grew, they talked about names and made plans for the baby. Franklin built a cradle from cottonwood, carving simple designs into the wood. Theresa sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They were preparing together for this new life they had created. One night in late summer, as they lay in bed with Franklin's hand resting on Theresa's rounded belly, she said, "You ever think about how strange this is? 6 months ago, I did not know you existed. Now you are my husband and the father of my child." "I think about it all the time," Franklin admitted. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that storm had not come, if I had ridden a different route, if I had been an hour earlier or later. We would have passed like ships in the night and never known what we were missing." "Fate?" Theresa asked. "Maybe, or maybe just dumb luck. Either way, I am grateful for it. So am I." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I do not feel guilty anymore about Robert, about being happy with you. I think I have finally accepted that I can honor his memory while still moving forward with my life." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Franklin said, kissing her forehead. "You have room in your heart for both the past and the present. That does not diminish either one." The baby came in December, during another Montana blizzard. Franklin rode through the storm to fetch Mrs. Patterson, who had experience with birthing. She arrived with her bag of supplies and immediately took charge, boiling water and laying out clean cloths while Franklin paced anxiously. The labor was long and difficult. Theresa was strong, but the baby was large and stubborn. Franklin held her hand and wiped her brow and felt utterly useless as she struggled. Twice he heard Mrs. Patterson mutter under her breath in a way that made his blood run cold. But finally, as dawn was breaking, a baby's cry split the air. Franklin heard Mrs. Patterson say, "It is a boy, a healthy boy," and felt his knees go weak with relief. Mrs. Patterson cleaned the baby and handed him to Theresa, who looked exhausted but radiant. Franklin knelt beside the bed and looked at his son for the first time. The baby was red and wrinkled and perfect. "Hello, little one," Theresa whispered. "Welcome to the world." "What should we call him?" Franklin asked, his voice rough with emotion. Theresa looked at her husband with tired, loving eyes. "I was thinking Frederick, after you, Frederick Robert Xavier, honoring both his fathers." Franklin felt tears sting his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Robert would have approved. He always said the best way to honor someone is to pass their name to the next generation." "Then Frederick it is," Franklin said, gently touching his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his thumb and something in Franklin's chest expanded to the point of pain. This was his family. These were his people. This was his purpose. The first year of Frederick's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and hard work and moments of perfect joy. Franklin learned to change diapers and warm bottles and bounce a fussy baby at 3 in the morning. Theresa learned to function on no sleep and still manage the household. Together, they learned the rhythms of parenthood, the constant giving of oneself, the endless worry, the overwhelming love. The homestead prospered too. Their first harvest was good enough to pay off some debts and buy a milk cow. The second year was even better. Franklin proved to have a knack for farming that surprised him. He experimented with different planting techniques, rotated crops, managed the land carefully. Theresa kept chickens and a vegetable garden and sold eggs and produce in town. Slowly, gradually, they built something solid. They added a proper room onto the soddy, then another. Franklin bought more land when a neighboring claim was abandoned. They acquired 2 horses, more cattle, a wagon. They were not rich by any means, but they were making it. building a life through sheer determination and hard work. Other families in the area, which had been initially standoffish about the quick remarriage, eventually accepted them. They were invited to barn raisings and church socials. Theresa made friends with other women. Franklin found camaraderie with the other homesteaders, men who understood the particular challenges of trying to wring a living from this hard land. When Frederick was 2, Theresa became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and the birth, while still difficult, went more smoothly. They had a daughter whom they named Florence Grace. She had Theresa's brown eyes and Franklin's stubborn chin. "Our family is complete," Theresa said, holding Florence while Frederick clambered onto the bed to see his new sister. "Is that enough for you?" Franklin asked. "2 children, more than enough. 2 is perfect." She smiled at him. "Unless you want a whole passel of them." 2 is perfect, Franklin agreed. He had everything he had ever wanted and things he had never dared to dream of. A wife who loved him, children who bore his name, land that was his own. He was no longer a drifter, no longer unanchored. He was Franklin Xavier, husband and father and homesteader, and he had never been happier. Time passed in the way it does when life is full and busy. Frederick grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions about farming and animals and the wider world. Florence was gentler, preferring to help her mother in the house and garden, though she had a stubborn streak that could rival any mule's. Franklin taught Frederick to ride when he was 5, sitting him on the old mare and walking beside them. Theresa taught Florence to sew and cook and read. Together, they taught both children about kindness, hard work, and the value of family. There were hard times, too. A drought one year that nearly destroyed their crop. A winter so cold that several cattle froze despite their best efforts. Frederick broke his arm falling from the hayloft when he was 7. Florence nearly died from scarlet fever when she was 4. Through all of it, Franklin and Theresa held each other up, drawing strength from their partnership. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Franklin took Theresa into Black Hawk for dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson. It was a rare luxury, being alone together, dressed in their best clothes, eating food someone else had prepared. 10 years, Theresa said, raising her glass of cider in a toast. "Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday, other days it feels like forever." Franklin touched his glass to hers. "Best 10 years of my life. Mine too." She paused, then said, "I want to tell you something. I have never told you because I did not know how to say it without sounding ungrateful or disloyal to Robert's memory. But I need you to know." "All right," Franklin said, suddenly nervous. "What we have together is deeper and more real than anything I had with Robert. I loved him and he was a good man, but we were children playing at being adults. We did not really know each other, not in the way you and I do. With you, I can be completely myself. I do not have to hide the parts of me that are sharp or difficult or complicated. You love all of me, even the parts that are hard to love, and that is a gift beyond measure." Franklin reached across the table and took her hand. "You gave me a reason to stop running. Before I found you in that snow, I was just existing, not really living. You taught me what it means to have roots, to belong somewhere to someone. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Theresa corrected. "That is what partnership means." They talked late into the night, reminiscing about the early days, laughing about the mistakes they had made, marveling at how their children were growing. When they finally returned home, Frederick and Florence were asleep, and Mrs. Patterson was dozing in the rocking chair. Franklin paid her and thanked her, then carried his children one by one to their beds. He found Theresa standing in the doorway of their room, looking at the life they had built together with an expression of such contentment that it made his heart ache. "Happy?" he asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "So happy," she said. "Sometimes I think about that day you found me in the snow. I was ready to die. I had given up. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not know I was praying. You saved my life in so many ways, Frank. Not just by pulling me out of the snow, but by giving me a reason to keep living." "You saved mine too," Franklin said. "I was already dead inside, just too stubborn to lie down. You brought me back to life." They stood together in the doorway, looking at the simple but sturdy home they had built, listening to the soft breathing of their children, feeling the warmth of each other. This was what mattered. This was what lasted. Not gold or glory or adventure, but love and family and the daily choice to keep building something together. The years continued to pass. Frederick grew tall and strong, taking on more of the farm work as he got older. Florence blossomed into a bright, compassionate young woman who spent her free time helping Mrs. Patterson care for the sick and elderly in Black Hawk. Franklin's beard turned gray, then white. Theresa's hair developed silver streaks that she refused to dye, saying she had earned every one. They added more land to their homestead when they could afford it, eventually owning nearly 500 acres. They built a proper house to replace the soddy, 2 stories with real glass windows and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was not fancy, but it was solid and comfortable and theirs. When Frederick turned 18, he announced he wanted to go east to study agriculture at the university in Illinois. Franklin and Theresa scraped together the money to send him, proud and terrified in equal measure. He came back 3 years later with a degree and ideas about modern farming techniques that he was eager to implement. Florence surprised everyone by falling in love with the Reverend Calloway's nephew, a young man named Thomas Wells, who had come west to help his uncle with the church. They married when Florence was 20, and Thomas took over as pastor when Reverend Calloway retired. They built a house near the church and started a family of their own. Franklin and Theresa became grandparents, then grandparents several times over. Frederick married a smart, capable woman named Sarah, and they had 3 children who ran wild over the farm. Florence and Thomas had 4 children who were slightly more civilized but no less energetic. On summer evenings, the whole family would gather at the main house for dinner. The table was long and crowded and loud with conversation and laughter. Franklin would sit at the head, watching his children and grandchildren, and marvel at the sheer abundance of it all. From one desperate rescue in a snowstorm, all of this had grown. When Franklin was 58, he was thrown from a horse and broke his hip. The injury never properly healed, and he walked with a pronounced limp after that, relying on a cane. It frustrated him, this reminder of mortality, of age creeping up. But Theresa, practical as always, simply adjusted their work patterns, taking on tasks he could no longer do, accepting help from Frederick when needed. "We are getting old," Franklin said one night as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We are," Theresa agreed. "Is that so bad?" "I suppose not. I just thought we would have more time. Frank, we have had 30 years together. Some people do not get 30 days. We have been blessed beyond measure." She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in the familiar way they had done thousands of times before. "Whatever time we have left, we will spend it together. That is all that matters." Franklin turned to look at his wife, this woman who had been his salvation and his partner, who had given him children and grandchildren and a life worth living. She was older now, her face lined, her hair white, but she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every hard day, every struggle, every sacrifice, I would do it all again just to be with you." "I know," Theresa said. "So would I." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The land stretched out before them, the land they had worked and shaped and made their own. In the distance, they could see lights coming on in Frederick's house, in Florence's house in town. Their legacy, their family, their future. When Frederick was 25, he took over the primary management of the farm, insisting that Franklin and Theresa had earned their rest. Franklin protested at first, not wanting to be useless, but eventually accepted that his body could not do what it once had. He became an advisor more than a worker, spending his days tinkering with equipment, playing with grandchildren, sitting on the porch with Theresa. They took up reading again, going through books the way they had in those early days. Sometimes they would read aloud to each other, sometimes in companionable silence. On Sundays, the whole family would gather for dinner after church, and the house would fill with noise and life and love. On their 40th anniversary, their children threw them a party. It seemed like the whole town turned out. People brought food and gifts and stories about Franklin and Theresa, about the example their marriage had set, about the family they had built. Mrs. Patterson, now ancient and frail but still sharp as a tack, cornered Franklin during the party. "Remember when you came to buy supplies all those years ago? I warned you about grief and hasty decisions." "I remember," Franklin said. "I was wrong," she said firmly. "Or maybe I was right, but it did not matter. Either way, you two proved that sometimes love finds us in the strangest ways, and we would be fools not to grab hold of it." She patted his arm. "You have been good for each other and good for this town. Thank you for that." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Franklin and Theresa found themselves alone on the porch, watching the stars come out. 40 years, Franklin said. "How did that happen?" "One day at a time," Theresa said. "Same way we do everything." "Do you ever think about that day in the snow, about how different everything could have been?" "Sometimes. But mostly I think about what did happen, not what might have. We have had a good life, Frank. Better than good. We have been happy. That is rarer than people think." Franklin pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solidity of her presence. "I meant what I said that first night we met, after you told me to hold you closer. I never let go, not once in 40 years. And I never wanted you to," Theresa said. They sat together under the stars. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and built something that would last long after they were gone. Their love story was written in the land they had cultivated, in the children they had raised, in the community they had helped build. It was written in every sunrise they had watched together, every hardship they had overcome, every moment of joy and sorrow and ordinary life. Franklin died first, at the age of 67, his heart simply giving out one winter morning as he sat in his favorite chair. Theresa found him there, peaceful and still, as though he had just fallen asleep. She sat with him for a long time, holding his hand, saying goodbye to the man who had saved her life, and then spent the rest of his own making sure she never regretted being saved. The funeral was huge. It seemed the whole territory turned out to pay respects to Franklin Xavier, homesteader, husband, father, friend. Frederick gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about the father who had chosen him, who had given him his name, who had taught him what it meant to be a good man. Theresa stood at the graveside with her children and grandchildren gathered around her, and felt the weight of loss settle into her bones. But she also felt gratitude, enormous and overwhelming, for the 43 years they had been given. Not everyone got that. Not everyone got to grow old with the person they loved. She lived another 5 years after Franklin's death, spending her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, tending her garden, reading, writing letters. She never remarried. When people asked why, she would smile and say, "I had my great love. One is enough for any lifetime." On a spring morning in 1927, Theresa Zimmerman Xavier died in her sleep, surrounded by family. She was 71 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Her children buried her next to Franklin, under the cottonwood trees where they had buried Robert all those years ago. The three of them together, each a chapter in Theresa's life story. At the funeral, Florence read from her mother's diary, entries written in those early days after the rescue. Franklin Xavier found me in the snow when I had given up all hope. He saved my life, and then he gave me a reason to live it. I was a widow, broken and lost, and he was a drifter without roots or purpose. Together, we became something neither of us could have been alone. I told him to hold me closer that night in the cabin, and he never let go. Not for 43 years. That is the truest definition of love I know. Someone who holds on, no matter what. The family homestead continued through the generations. Frederick's son took it over, then his son, then his. The original soddy was long gone, but the house Franklin built still stood, enlarged and modernized but fundamentally the same. In the front yard, someone placed a bronze marker telling the story of Franklin and Theresa, of a rescue in a blizzard that became a love story that built a legacy. On winter nights, when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled, the descendants of Franklin and Theresa would sit by the fire and tell the story of how their family began. How a cowboy rescued a shivering widow from the snow, how she asked him to hold her closer, and how he never let go. How from that desperate moment came love, and from that love came life, and from that life came all of them. It was a story about survival and choice, about grief and healing, about love finding a way even in the harshest circumstances. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best, that sometimes the person we need appears exactly when we need them, that sometimes holding on is the bravest and most important thing we can do. The land remembers. The wind carries their names. And in every generation, in the faces of children who bear the names Frederick and Theresa, the story continues. A cowboy and a widow, brought together by chance and held together by choice, proving that love once found can weather any storm.